Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good to see you on here. My name is Brian Chavis. I'm the Technology Strategy Officer for CIS. I'll have a supporting role in the webinar today, but I want to introduce our primary speaker, Tim Riddle. Tim earned a degree in business administration and accounting from Texas Tech. After working for Price Waterhouse, Tim started his own business, Custom Information Services, or CIS as we call it. Tim has grown CIS into a nationally recognized and accredited IT company. He's an expert in management information systems, IT strategy, cybersecurity, and more. So without any further talk about Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. I think someone else just joined. So for everybody joining here, if you have questions along the way, want to engage in conversation, it's welcome all throughout. And so you just unmute yourself and feel free to join in. We have a very informal process. So just something very quickly, some of our certifications in the cybersecurity space, we are extremely security conscious within our world. We're a managed service provider, and we believe that we have to be held to a higher standard than everybody else out there to not only to keep ourselves safe, but keep our customers safe. And so we are, through the Overwatch badge that we have there, we have been independently validated and verified that our processes are both quality, in place, and documented. And so we have multiple parties that have looked at what we do and they didn't kick us out, so we must be pretty good at it. So starting off, I always like to ask this question. And so if you have a microphone, please unmute. Tell me what you think the single biggest point of weakness for every company is. If you don't have a microphone, you want to put it in the chat window, that'd be great. So Scott, you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's really just the culture. But I read somewhere in this, one of my blue team handbooks, it's really like the blue team falls on everyone. It's like you're only as strong as your weakest link, so to speak. So if you don't have a good culture where everyone's thinking about vulnerabilities the same way, I would say that that'll set you up for defeat, I guess, so to speak, or you're not as strong as you could be.
Okay. Steve, you want to unmute and let us know? Or chat into the chat window? I guess he is having difficulties there. How about you, Jeff? Jeff chatted in and said, biggest weakness is probably email. Okay. I'll give Steve one last shot at it. If he doesn't come on, we'll just move on from there. So I think it's people. And it comes along the lines, I think, that what we're saying, it's the culture within a company, it's people. Email is probably the tool that they display this weakness on the most, but it's all about the people and keeping them from doing things that invite the bad actors in. And that's a huge part of the process. And that gets into the next thing that we're looking at here. The emails that come in with the phishing, and you have really two different types of phishing. You have a general phishing that's just supposed to appeal to everybody, and then you have what's called spear phishing. And so in the general phishing, you've got something where it looks like it's real. You're supposed to click on something like we see here. It's a generic, it's targeted at any person within a company. When you get into the spear phishing part, you get into they're targeting somebody, they know who they're going after. It's somebody that has access to wire money or something like that they're going straight into to try to get to cash that they can steal from you, type of deal. There's different ways that happens, but the spear phishing when it's successful, is usually much more expensive than the regular phishing, but both are a problem. So the common things that we see businesses who are victims of cybercrime do wrong. First and foremost, they didn't train their people on security awareness, and there are multiple plans out there. Some of them very, very, very cost effective that will do both video training and introduction, as well as sending out sample fake phishing emails that when they click on it, instead of going to a bad actor, it goes to the Tattletale site, and then management gets to see who is clicking on emails that they shouldn't. And we find when we add that in, it becomes a contest within the company of who's going to find that email, right? Who's going to be the one that detected it. And that gaming theory really adds to the culture in the process. The other thing that they run into is you should have a theory, a philosophy, if you will, that it's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when you get hacked, because sooner or later, everybody gets hit with something. And so being able to prevent that hack is important, but also being able to recover from it. And so when it comes to the popular thing that's going with the bad actors right now with ransomware, if you having a backup is a good thing, but typically that's an automatic sync process. But having one with a point in time recovery allows you to find that last minute before you get hit with ransomware and restore from there. And so that's always a basic thing. And we'll go over a lot more of those types of things as we get down into our cybersecurity pyramid later on. The other thing that they usually don't do is they don't have someone independent coming in and doing a cold assessment where they're having to validate what everybody believes is in place with what's really in place and what's really happening. Are patches really up to date? Is antivirus really up to date? Is your firewall set up properly? Do you have zero trust in place? Having all these things analyzed and creating a formal plan for remediating weaknesses is, to me, it's become the baseline of what you need to do to be responsible over your cybersecurity. Again, if anybody has any questions or comments along the way, please just interrupt me. So I think one of the things that's happened is the whole environment behind the bad actors has really changed. What used to be the vision of a hacker as the bad kid that's grown up and he's living in his mother's basement and he hacks for the glory of it really has come and gone. Now you have the cyber terrorists, if you will, the cyber hackers. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they have a lot of talent. And if you don't have your act together on staying in front of what's happening there, they're going to be able to hack you, and they're good at it. And it's just one of those things that we found out on the dark web. There's actually sites on the dark web with a hacker for hire. So when you have somebody that wants to hack you, they don't have to have technical skills anymore. They can go out and pay some Bitcoin, point them at you, and hackers will go in and start their phishing campaigns, their outside in scans for weaknesses, all those types of things, targeting at one or more companies, all for a fee. And so it's really running rampant. Then we're going to get into some of the hacking techniques that are there. Has anybody here been exposed to any of these types of attacks? Scott, Steve?
No, thankfully I haven't, but we are dealing with some of the impacts from that Log4j vulnerability that's going on right now.
Right.
Thankfully it's contained and mostly limited, but that was an impact for sure.
Okay. How about you, Scott? Or Jeff?
Yeah, I've definitely seen some phishing with employees buying gift cards from an email from the CEO, and a ransomware attempt that before I joined the company, but nothing recently.
Okay. Yeah, once they reply to one of those phishing, they're now on everybody's list as the prime target. And the number of phishing emails they're going to get goes way up. So we've talked about phishing. Bait and switch is where they make a website and or a link look like the real thing, but it's not. So when you go in to log in, you're given their credentials to what you think the site is. So if you just thought you logged into your bank, you've just given them your access to your bank. Keylogger has been around a long time. That's usually something that's you've clicked on something that downloaded a keylogger, and it mimics all your keystrokes to a site. And they go in and try to figure out how to use it, figure out where your password is, where you're logging into, that type of thing. Denial of service attacks still happens. I don't hear about them as much. That's basically somebody goes after a site with so much traffic that isn't real, that keeps the real traffic from getting through. Clickjacking is similar to bait and switch. It's just a slightly different approach. The next one, the fake wireless access point, man in the middle, is like when you would go to the airport and you're trying to log into a Wi-Fi connection, and it's a fake one, and it's actually connecting your machine to the hacker. The hacker sitting across the room on a PC or a phone or something, and they're now have access to your system. Cookie theft is where they've gotten into your browser at session, and they're finding the cookies that you have there, and they're replacing them with their cookies. And so it can end up redirecting you to a lot of different places. And of course, you got the traditional viruses and Trojans. Any questions? All right, so this slide is kind of the meat of what I would say cybersecurity planning and the foundation of what I would call your ability to do a self-assessment. When you look at the bottom, the different things that are kind of standard in place, some of them are a little bit new, but most of them have been around for a long time. And they're really the fundamental. If you have any holes in this area, then you're extremely vulnerable. I think everybody understands what a backup is. The key word there is going to be offsite. And so one place I see a lot of people having a gap is they say, okay, well, my email's in the cloud. I don't need a backup, right? They have it. Well, not really. Those sites can get hacked too. So you really need, whether you're in the cloud, in a SaaS type app, or you have on-premise tools, you still need to back out all your data up into something that is secure. Force patching, the typical type of patch that we're talking about there is the Windows desktop and server patches to get the known security issues covered. Relying on people to do their own patch or using the standard Windows out of the box, I'll connect up and get my update, doesn't really work well. And so force patching is usually a tool that comes in and not only pushes a patch down, but it logs the results and sends an alert whenever something didn't get patched that should be. That's a critical piece. Multi-factor authentication, all I can say is you should have it absolutely everywhere you have anything critical. You should also have a multi-factor style that does not include SMS text. Usually there's some type of app that has a more secure site because SMS can be spoofed. Of course, everybody needs a firewall. It can be hardware-based or software-based, but you should have that there. If you're having remote access, and a lot of companies do that didn't used to, it needs to be secure. So if you're coming from a site that isn't secure, you definitely need to have VPN set up, and or you need some type of validation process so they know who's coming in and where they're coming from. Sometimes if you have good multi-factor authentication, then you can mitigate some of the need for remote access, but you still need to have the zero trust architecture from that I'm going to get to up above. Antivirus, anti-malware is still important. You need it, but you cannot rely on that by itself to be safe and secure anymore. They've gotten past that. Anti-spam filters are very important. The reducing the number of times that someone has an opportunity to click on that bad email is very important, and you need an anti-spam tool to isolate those. And a good anti-spam tool is not just a junk folder in your Outlook. It's going to be something that moves the email to a secure site that you can see the content through an application, but not really open the email. Advanced email security really has some artificial intelligence built behind it for detecting spear phishing attempts and being able to alert you inside the email that this looks like a spear phishing attempt. The next one is I believe is becoming more of a standard like the antivirus used to be. And that is a managed EDR, endpoint detection and response. And what this does is the application wraps itself around an endpoint, which typically is a desktop, a laptop, or a server. Endpoint versions usually stop at that level, and they're going to watch for activity going on. And so I'm going to oversimplify, but the concept, an example of the concept is this. Somebody opens an email. That's not an unusual event by itself, happens every day. Somebody clicks on a link in an email, happens all the time. That by itself is not an alert. Somebody encrypts a file. Well, that happens a lot just automatically through systems, and it's one file being encrypted by itself is not really an issue. Somebody starts encrypting a lot of files in a lot of places, that's an alert. But when you put all of those things together as a string of events, now you've got the endpoint detection and response. And so a good endpoint detection and response system will not only detect that happen, but shut it down. It's going to send out an alert. So if it's managed by a SOC, a Security Operations Center, a professional is going to evaluate the issue and then escalate as appropriate. A lot of the endpoint detection is going to remediate. They're going to stop it in its tracks. They're going to isolate anything that's been touched, send out an alert for somebody to determine what happened. Anybody have any questions on that one? Okay. Going from there, I'm going to jump from that one and just go ahead and jump up here because it's the same conversation to a full managed SOC. It includes a subset, the EDR is a subset of that, but then it expands that concept into anything that has a log. So it's going to be your firewalls, your servers, printers, just anything that has activity going on. Those logs and those threat threads are then uploaded into the same artificial intelligence, and they're looked at it in a holistic view across your entire environment. And so that really is where you want to be for proactive preventative measures, is that full managed SOC. Does anybody out there use a SOC right now?
No.
How about Scott and Steve? Do you?
Not personally, no, but there is definitely a division within Amazon that oversees the Whole Foods level.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's not my typical attendee.
Yep.
How about you, Steve? You want to put it in the chat if you can't speak? You must be offline. Okay. All right. So moving on. DNS protection. So I'm back down here in the yellow. DNS protection is basically keeping people from going to known bad sites. And that can happen through a firewall. That can happen through an app. There's different ways to do that. There are some, we also, when we manage networks, we put policies in place and firewall protocols in place that will restrict entire countries. If the company in question doesn't have business in Russia, then we're going to block it. If you don't have business in North Korea, we're going to block it. And so there's a lot of different things to do there, but having the tools in place to do that is extremely important. It just reduces down the number of possible threats. Now the password vault is they're getting much more sophisticated than they used to. Most of them are still going to have I store my password here and I can go find it type of thing. But the more modern ones will connect up with all the SaaS sites and actually, and most major applications, and actually pass the password through. And so the end user may not even know the password to the thing they're going to, but they've used multi-factor authentication to get into their password vault, and then they can launch into the other applications from there in a secure fashion. And that way you can have these extremely long and complicated passwords. You don't have to memorize them. And the other thing that you can do as a network management, when you have an employee quit, if you lock them out of the password vault, you've taken all their access away to all those third-party sites where there's logins and things like that. So password vault is a very important tool, and they're very cost effective as well. Disk encryption. I see this mostly where you have strong pieces of PII, personally identifiable information, your credit card for PCI compliance, your HIPAA for health insurance. And so the actual storage on your file servers is encrypted itself. It reduces the potential for somebody just downloading it and being able to use it. Now, the reality is, if they've hacked your username and password, then they're going to have access to the same keys that decrypt it that you would. So there are limits as to how good it is. Mobile device management is also an important piece. If you've got a lot of people with laptops or phones out there that have sensitive company information on there, not only is it a good tool for efficiency of managing those devices and supporting users, but if the device gets lost, you have the ability to remotely wipe it and keep that information from falling into the hands of a bad actor. Cyber awareness training, I think we've all talked about. And I won't go into it further here, but we've got some really good services out there if you would like some references on what to use. The next one is a network going up to the proactive level. So if you get the bare minimum and the foundational, you're in pretty good shape. You're not bulletproof, and really nobody's bulletproof. And depending on how high up the pyramid you want to climb and how sensitive your environment is, and really it comes down to, we talk with our clients about what's an allowable downtime. You know, how big of an impact would it be to your company if your systems are offline for an hour, a day, a week? And that drives a lot of the other things you do in both preventative and recovery capabilities to meet within the acceptable risk. And a lot of people say, well, I never want to go down. I never want to lose anything. Well, the never cost is much higher than the 1 hour of downtime. The 4 hours of downtime is exponentially less than the 1 hour, et cetera, et cetera. So it comes down to a cost benefit analysis. On the proactive level, the first one's network and security assessment. I think we talked a little bit about this earlier on. Basically, when we come in to do a network security assessment, and I've got another slide on that later, we'll get into more details. We have tools we're going to bring in. We're going to do scans. We're going to go inside scan, outside in, inside out, and look for weaknesses. There's a huge database of things we look for, right down to firmware inside of the firewalls, to printer drivers, to, of course, patching levels, looking at group policies and inside of Active Directory, all those types of things to find the obvious holes. And we'll find things like inactive logins. You had a user that was worked for you 5 years ago, and their account's still active. That's not a good thing. And so finding all those things and creating a remediation plan from it is something that should happen at least once a year, just to keep up with the entropy within the system. Monitoring, I'll go through each one of them. Monitoring is SaaS. Typically, your major SaaS application, like an Office 365, or maybe you've got an accounting system or something like that, they have logs inside of them that will identify things that didn't happen like they expected. So somebody attempted to log in but failed. And you could go through each one of those if you learned where it was and do your monitoring manually, but the time involved is just horrendous. And so when you get the right monitoring tools in place, and that's part of what we do in a network security assessment is put these monitoring tools in place and scan it. Then we've gone into places where we start asking questions. Do you have anybody that's working for you in the Ukraine? Well, why are they trying to log into these 5 people accounts? And so then we can set the firewall, block it, make sure everybody changes their password, all that type of thing. But those monitoring things become very important because a lot of times when people get hacked, they don't know they've been hacked. And so when someone gains access, they don't immediately do something. They lay in wait and they try to gather more capabilities and more capabilities. And so when you can detect something like that going on, now you can cut their access off because you know that it's happening. And that's really what monitoring is all about. Personal information monitoring, the PII, is basically scanning all your file systems to find things that are stored where they shouldn't be stored. So if your HR is in an encrypted spot, but somebody took a list of employees with social security numbers and put it in a different spot, it'll find that and detect it. And that's one example. Local area network and wide area network monitoring, really. That's something that we do as part of managed services for a lot of reasons, but for the cybersecurity piece, you're also going to be monitoring for a lot of things like brute force attacks, attempted logins that didn't work a lot of times in a row, that type of thing. And just having a system that watches it 24/7 and sends out an alert when something happens is extremely important. The last one is something that some people like and some people don't. When you're monitoring staff, you're monitoring what people are doing within the system. You're really looking at the threat inside of your network, inside of your trusted area, and are they doing things they shouldn't? And there's a lot of tools that I kind of call spyware. If someone wants to do that, they can keep up with where somebody goes, what they're doing, track the activity, send out an alert. I put those tools on once, and I had an employee that began working remotely, and they were spending 8 hours a day on Facebook. And so the cost of that was significant. And so the tools have their place. Again, some people like them and some don't. Has anybody here worked in a company where there was end user monitoring like that?
No.
No. Okay. What do you think about it?
It's a tough one.
It is.
You definitely see, especially in this day and age with the Great Resignation, you got a sensitive employee pool right now. So
Yeah. It's a hard decision.
Yeah.
About whether or not you do that. It is. All right. The next one is your internal cybersecurity policies. There's 2 pieces to this. One is writing them down and analyzing them and making sure that your policies are where they need to be. And of course, you've got to have a balance between employee efficiency and productivity versus security. Sometimes there's an offset. But the more important part is, what do you do with those policies? A lot of people will go through the policy writing process. They'll put the book on the shelf and say, glad that's done. And that means they wasted their time, because it's about the policies should be showing how do you verify enforcement of the policy, compliance with it, that type of thing. And that compliance process is extremely important for a policy to be worth anything. Disaster recovery planning, part of that's your backup, your offsite backup. Can you restore? Do you have a nearby that you can fire up in a virtual image right away? That type of thing. But also getting into the facility piece. And so do you have, if your facility has been breached or destroyed or whatever it is, how do you work? And if all of a sudden everybody's working remote when they were working in the office, do you have your cybersecurity protocols in place? Did that create a chaos that took all your controls and threw them out the window? There's a lot of the pieces of disaster recovery that need to fall into preserving your security protocols when you have facility change or a change in redirect of where your servers are, that type of thing. We've talked about the full managed SOC, and I won't go over that anymore. Zero trust architecture. So we run into this a lot in the manufacturing world. We have a lot of manufacturing clients. And so to give you an example of where it comes to play, there's a lot of manufacturing equipment where they're introducing, quote, the Internet of Things, where you have a digital control over the machine. And those controlling devices typically are not Windows based, and they don't lend themselves well right now to good breach prevention, to cybersecurity protection. And so when we have that, we create a zero trust environment where that effectively through a separate VLAN gets isolated in its own network that has no access to the internet. Then when you need data out of that, we create a secure pipe between that and an intermediary in the DMZ that can gather data and send it to places that do have access to the internet. And so that's one example of zero trust. Another example of zero trust is for every user that you grant access to your network, you clearly define what they do need, what they don't need, and restrict their access to purely what they need. There's a lot more management that comes into play with that. But the idea is if somebody gets hacked, you don't want them with a shared folder that covers every data file in the company because they hack one person, now they've got everybody. And so having the zero trust says you're going to get hacked, you believe you're going to get hacked, and how do you minimize access of the person that's doing the hacking? And so I'm oversimplifying, but that's the fundamental basis of zero trust. And there are some tools you bring to play, but most of it is architecture design. The next levels up are much more limited as to who would do these. The NIST compliance is a standard that really comes into play a lot with the defense industry. And it's just the government promulgated set of security standards that you have to comply with. And so there's a whole auditing process to go through to become compliant with that. If you're not in a regulated industry, typically you're going to stop down at the networks and security assessment piece instead of going to full NIST. Disaster recovery plan testing. So there's an old saying, what is a disaster recovery plan without a test? Well, it's planned, it should work, but you don't really know if it's going to until the disaster hits, and then it's too late. So mimicking your disaster, having your servers fail over, testing it, everybody takes a laptop home and can get in remote, the security's still in place while you're not in a firefight is a really good idea. It also takes a lot of time, and it's something people don't usually get to. Advanced cyber risk assessments like NIST, but it's just not based upon that industry standard. Penetration testing. Most people I talk to, if you can look through this pyramid and you see gaping holes, you're going to waste your time with a penetration test because you're going to fail. And so you're better off spending your time and effort filling out all these pieces of this pyramid first, and after you think you have them in place, then you do a penetration test to see if you really got to where you thought you would be. And the last one is compliance as a service. It's really like come back to the cybersecurity policies or the NIST piece. If you don't have the staff and time or desire to ensure you're complying with some of these things, then there are services out there that can do routine testing and checking to see where compliance weaknesses are. So that was kind of long. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Did you find this useful? Can you give me some feedback?
Yeah, definitely useful to see what's out there.
Thanks, Jeff. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, I think for me, visuals always help. Yeah, and I appreciate the layers and the colors and the breakdown, the details with everything. And I guess I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Looking at this breakdown, it's very comprehensive. How much of these services are provided by CIS or a typical MSP, and does that kind of vary with what the client needs?
Well, the short answer is not all MSPs are up to speed to be what we call an MSSP. And so they haven't gone through the process to really master all these pieces, because there's a lot of pieces. And most MSPs will do some of them. When I look at what we do with our customers, our managed service process includes, depending on the size of the company, but usually a quarterly network and security assessment, because we're updating what we've done before. We do our scans, we find our weaknesses, we're able to look through our tickets and determine where weaknesses are. And so most of our clients don't begin, when they first come on board, they don't have all these things. And they can't afford both time and effort and money. They can't afford just to put everything in all at once. So we go in and we analyze where they are, and we set up a rolling 12-month budget and a longer term plan. May not all have a budget on there, but they get estimates about which things we're going to add, what's the timing we're going to add. And we sit down with the customer and talk about their business priorities and what is the strategy for IT and how fast or how slow do we need to go. And that process is what is our approach to that continuous improvement culture, because you can't fix everything at once. But if you always get just a little bit better, then a year from now you're better than you were before, and the next year a little better after that, and it helps you keep up with the onslaught of things coming at you. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did, absolutely, and for sure it's customizable.
Well, it has to be. The one size will never fit all.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the follow-up I had too is, I bet a lot of this is the education piece, but going back to the initial question of what is a company's biggest vulnerability, the people.
Yep.
Have you had situations where you've had success trying to get people to change their culture to become more secure?
Yes, absolutely. There's two things you have to do. There's more than two, but there's two things that always have to happen. One, you've got to have the attention of upper level management. If you've got an owner, a CEO, or somebody that's the leader of the company, and they're gonna say, "Oh, cybersecurity is not that important. It really doesn't matter," then you're gonna have a hard time changing the culture. It's not that it can't change, but it's going to be a long, hard road. So getting management on board is the first step. The second step, I believe that the success is going to lie in the fundamental tactic of the cyber awareness training. And so the cyber awareness training we have starts off with everybody has to sign into a site that has, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, it's got one video a week that's interactive. You watch a little thing, you take a little test so that you understand terminology, understand concepts, and it gets the awareness going. You combine that with the phishing campaign, the phishing simulation campaign that sends emails out to people to see who's going to click on a link, right? And there's two things of culture change that we do with that. One, you make it kind of a contest so that people try to be the one that found the phishing email. Oh, I got one. This is it, right? And the other is the negative side about that. It's like a scoreboard. Who clicked on the email? And anybody that clicks on the email that goes to the bad site, you're going to get a report on. If it's one of the simulation emails anyway, you're going to get a report on, and they need to go to remediation training. So there's both the reward of finding it and competition side, and then there's the stick instead of the carrot of, hey, you blew it, you clicked on the email, go back and take the video thing again. And we found that the positive side works better than the negative, but having them both there, because it kind of also becomes you got caught I didn't, and you get that camaraderie thing going. And all of that just drives attention to cybersecurity issues. Does
Yeah,
that help?
that's something I've enjoyed within our work too. We have a report fishiness button built into Outlook, and it's very satisfying when you catch those things and you feel like you're
Nice.
staying
So you actually added a button into Outlook that reported as fishy?
Yeah, half the time I report stuff that actually isn't the real fish in that campaign, just because I'm paranoid. But it's tremendously useful, so I love that.
Yeah, we've gotten to where when we send emails out and we're rolling something new out and we tell them you need to go click on this link, invariably almost everybody in the company picks up the phone and calls the guy in IT and say, "Is this real? Should I click on it?"
Yeah, I did the same thing. We had this new lady start on the IT team, and she's saying I had to do like an urgent update. I'm like, this screams phishing. So I actually called her. Like, I just want to make sure, is this legitimate? I didn't recognize your name.
Yep. Well, and that's what you have to do, unfortunately. I mean, it's
Yeah.
us against them. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to pay them. So yeah, good questions. Anybody else have any questions, comments? I'd love to hear anything where if you feel I've missed something or didn't present it right, how can I improve it? I'd love that feedback if you have any. Nope. Well, I'm proud. All right, let's move on. Got about 15 minutes left. So when you look back, I'm going to go back here and you look back over here, there are a couple of dozen different things that can be tools and approaches. And there's a lot of knowledge of product. There's a lot of knowledge and skill in understanding the impact of business. There's getting all of these things into place is not a simple process. And that's really what this is about. Without the right talent, you get all the tools you want. They're not going to be implemented properly, or they're going to shut you down. People are not going to accept it. And you really have to have the right implementation process when you roll out the changes to your security platform. And so one of the things, and I kind of dreamed this next slide off to the side there, is the Picasso man syndrome. So how many people have you seen in a smaller company where they've got a relatively small IT department of maybe 1 or maybe 5 or something like that? And to staff an IT, a fully staff an IT support process, you need all these different roles: your CIO, IT director, admin, engineer, help desk, analyst. There's probably more when you get in the functional side. And if you're trying to get all of those things out of 1 or 2 people, then that's where we get the Picasso thing, because you're taking all these different people and needs and trying to turn them into one person. It just doesn't work. And so that's where outsourcing was driven from, because you can get fractional support along the way. And that's really, there are pieces there. It's just not cost effective for a company of less than a couple hundred people to really do all for themselves. You get into the Amazon of the world, well, yeah, they are the outsource, right? All right. The next piece, I think you were talking, you hit on there when you said, how do you get the culture to change? So are you in denial? What is the impact of inaction? Well, the rate at which the hacking industry is progressing and maturing, if you're not keeping up and you're in denial, you're going to get hit. And I love that picture. I'm setting in a fire, but I'm okay. So at a security assessment, we talked about this before. There's a lot of different ways you can do a security assessment. These are the 5 areas that we think are common amongst all good ways. So you need some way to scan your network. There are tools for that. You very seldom can cover everything manually by yourself. So getting the right tool for that is very important. Also on your network topology, so not just your servers, but doing a LAN WAN data scan. So it's outside, inside out, outside in, as well as scanning your data for the personal information. Then scanning your tools for your major SaaS applications. You know, how safe and secure are those? Because it used to be you could set up your perimeter on your network, and if you protected your perimeter, then you're covered. And now the information technology environment at companies is no longer their internal network only. It has no perimeter. And so you really have to look at all the pieces, and that's where zero trust comes in. Email phishing simulation, we talked about that, and then a dark web scan to wrap it up. And we have tools where we scan for your email addresses, your domain, as well as individual email addresses to see who's got credentials for sale out there. And you'd be amazed at how many come back with the credentials for sale, which you can fix by changing your password, but you need to know it. And this is the only part where I have a sales pitch. And that's where tell you a little bit about us. We manage thousands of endpoints, and where an individual IT director does 50 to 100, we reach a scale that others can't reach. And so we not only have the tools, we have the people. We don't go on vacation. Individuals do, but we're 24/7, 365. We have some clients that do not go down no matter what. And so we're familiar with that environment. And I founded the company back in 1989, and I have a financial background as a CPA, and we implement ERP systems. So when we do strategic planning, it's not just the technical part of IT, it's also how does that strategy fit within your company's operation? What's a true ROI? What are the cost benefits? We understand the financial side as well. And Brian, I'm going to kick it back to you. Brian.
Yeah, I got it. So once again, great job, Tim. I mean, it's just very well organized. And I think that, you know, it gives the people a lot to think about. And so does anyone have any more questions? Any comments? Sure. It's a good time to ask. I mean, and there are no dumb questions. You know, you might have heard a term in here that's an IT term and you don't know quite what that means. Feel free to ask.
So I have a question for everybody else. Do you feel better or worse about where your company is with its cybersecurity before the seminar versus after? Jeff?
Well, I definitely, yeah, know the risks are there regardless, but you know, it's a matter of resource, as you mentioned, with smaller companies. I'm actually going into a new job starting in the new year. So, and it's in a kind of a consulting role. So just seeing what options are there for different companies is helpful. To jumping off point as far as the foundational items and the basic items, and see where people are.
Okay. All right, guys.
All right. I think that does it. You have our information. I'll probably reach out to you individually and just to get your comments after you've thought about it for a little while. A lot of times you may have a question pop up later or some thoughts. And so I'll reach out. Feel free to reach out to me or Tim. His information is up there. And once again, thanks for your participation.